Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr, and today we're taking a look again at 2022 MLB play-by-play data. This time I'm taking a look at what happens when there's a runner on second. So what happens to that runner on second base on balls hit to the infield? Of course, conventional wisdom would be on balls hit to the right side, that runner moves to third. On balls hit to the left side, they don't move to third. But let's see what the real data suggests. Let's have a look at that now. All right, so a little explanation for those of you who may be new here on how I break this down and what it looks like. You'll see two graphs or two charts for each situation. One of them is the raw data, which means number of plays, and the other one is percentages, so that we can break down and compare percentages. In this case, we're looking at a case where there's a runner on second only. So there's no runner on third to block advance, and there's no force. So there's a runner on second only. And we're going to see how often the runner on second advances to third on grounders to the infield. Ground ball plays in the infield. And the breakdown between 0 outs and 1 out. So to see if they take more risks with 1 out than they do with no outs and that kind of thing. A couple of caveats. We only, from the play-by-play data, I only know the end result of the play. I don't know, like, if there's a rundown or something like that that results in an out. Those are very rare, by the way. We only know the end result and the assists and putouts and that kind of thing. We don't know any of the weird stuff that may have happened during a play other than the end result. Other than, as I said, assists and putouts in the meantime. The other thing is there's a way higher number of ground ball outs with runner on second because last year, of course, MLB had a rule where in extra innings there was a runner placed on second base. So all of those are also included. So it includes all of those extra inning cases where a runner was on second, which means any extra inning, any start to an extra inning where there's a runner on second base, all of those plays are included in here because they qualify for the runner on second situation. But I think that just gives more data to tell us what happens in those cases. I didn't break it down and separate by extra inning versus regular game time. I didn't get that detailed. I just kind of wanted to get the broad strokes here. So with all of that said, if we look at the no out situations, which is at the top of this graph, if we look at the no-out situations at the top of the graph, we can see there were 734 ground outs with a runner on second and no out. And we can see the breakdown by position. If we look at the percentages here, we can see the breakdown by position. But what I really wanted to know is 3 different outcomes. Did the runner on second hold up at second and not advance to third on the ground ball out? Did the runner on second advance to third on a ground out? Or did the runner on second get thrown out trying to advance? And the batter ended up being safe, usually in those cases. So there's no double play ground outs to worry about here. We're just looking at the runner on second base. And what we can see is that overall, over half the time, almost 60% of the time, the runner advanced to third on a ground out with no outs. Not quite 40% of the time they held, and less than 4% of the time they were thrown out. Of course, that varies by position, which is what we were really interested in, is to see the breakdown, because conventional wisdom is that balls hit to the right, so first base and second base, the runner's advancing, and balls hit to the left, third base or short, they're not, generally. And so what we can see is balls hit to the pitcher, the runner on second holds almost 60% of the time. He only advances less than a third of the time, which makes sense. Catcher, you can kind of dismiss because there's only 5 plays in those cases, so not really enough of not really a significant number there to really draw any conclusions from. And let's look at right and left side. So first base, second base, I think this is going to be exactly what we'd expect. Balls hit and fielded by the first base or second baseman almost all the time that runner's advancing to third. The runner on second's advancing to third. Almost all the time. 93+% of the time, the runner's advancing to third. Now, balls hit to second, they're holding at second, not quite 5% of the time. So a little bit more than balls hit to first, which makes sense because second is closer to second than first is, obviously. And then there are a couple percent where they're thrown out over at third. So again, runner probably broke on contact maybe, and the first baseman or second baseman fielded it so quickly that they could throw over to third for the play. Now, balls hit to the left side. Balls hit to third base, the runner holds 86% of the time. So almost quite a bit of the percent of the time, almost all the time. They advance still 12% of the time. So probably the third baseman fields the ball. The runner's there waiting to see what happens. Third baseman throws to first, and then the runner takes off and makes it to third on the throw. Shortstop, though, the runner is holding about half the time. 51%, 51.18%. The runner holds on balls fielded by the shortstop. They advance to third a little less than half the time, 43%. So again, the other thing to keep in mind is that the shift was still legal last year. So some of these balls fielded by the shortstop may not have been in the traditional shortstop spot, though with a runner on second, probably more traditional than when there's nobody on base. But just interesting to note there. This is about 50-50 on balls hit to short, whether that runner advances or not. Now let's see if that's different with one out. And if we look at the percentages here, you can see both percentages here in the same screen. We see that runner advances to third a little bit more of the time than with no outs. So they're taking a little bit more of a risk. And for the most part, if we look at the positions, pitcher, for example, we can see that they held almost 60% of the time, whereas with one out, they only hold about a third of the time. They're advancing half the time. Catcher, we're going to not really look at too much because of small sample size. And balls hit to first or second, even more of the time the runner advances to third. So almost every case, the runner's advancing to third on balls hit to the right side with one out. Even more so than no outs, and no outs they almost always did too. Balls hit to the left side, so third baseman, the percentages are about the same between no outs and one out. A little bit less of the time are they holding, a little bit more percent, well, a few more percentage they're going to third. Whereas short, the percentages flip a little bit. So with no outs, the runner held more than half the time, but with one out and balls hit to short, the runner's holding just over a third of the time. So much more often they're trying to advance to third, or they're advancing to third on the play than with no out. Now, if we look at the raw data, we can see that there were 29 cases of the runner getting thrown out third with no outs and 46 with one out. Now, there were more plays overall, so we have to kind of take that into account. And the percentage isn't that huge. 4% roughly with no outs, 4.5% with one out that the runner's thrown out. So they're taking more risks. They're getting thrown out a couple more times, but not a huge number. Most of the time, there's just a slight shift, and you have more of a chance of that runner taking third on the play with one out, which makes sense, again, because after the play, there's going to be two outs, and you'd rather have a guy on third than second by a little bit, at least. So, with all that said, pretty straightforward breakdown, and I think it followed the wisdom that we would think. Other than shortstop was a little bit different. I would have expected even higher percentages where the runner held than what we see here, but that's not the case. Of course, third base is where it's really at. First and second, I think overall we can say that balls hit to the right side, the runner on second goes to third almost all the time. Balls hit to third base, the runner's holding a vast majority of the time. Balls hit to short, it's 50-50 with no outs, and a third of the time he's holding with one out. And almost 60% he's advancing to third with one out. So, all right, so that's the breakdown. If any of that, and if you were surprised by anything, leave that in the comments or anything else you want to comment on. If you have other things you want to see me take a look at, also leave that in the comments. I've taken a look at quite a number of different things. Check out the playlist with the MLB 2022 data breakdown, and you can see the other videos in the series. I have a few more videos that are planned to continue the series, so be watching for that too. If you like this kind of information, consider clicking the subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And I do have a solo Payoff Pitch League going right now. So if you want to check out my solo projects, you can find those playlists as well. I do little updates on those leagues as well. And you can head over to baseballmaelstrom.com to follow all of the action and see all of the stats for those. That's where we will leave things. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you for all the support. And until next time, have a great evening.